Last Man Home on the Sky Road. Written by John Miro. Part 11. My feet crunched on the wreckage of the reactor core's ruined door as I made my way inside. I froze and listened for any change in Druid's now constant rattling. It sounded the same. More booming blows of metal against metal followed, and I relaxed. As much as anyone can relax on their way to talking their friend out of suicide and blowing up a spaceship full of sentients along with him. I shook my head and told the metal rods in my shoulders and spine to relax. It wasn't like I was going to sneak up behind him and blast away. I wanted to walk him out of this room with me. Sneaky wouldn't help with that. "Drew, buddy?" The ceaseless rattling shifted faster, then slowed. I waited out of sight in the short hallway, just inside the ruined hatch. A shadow fell, and my friend slithered sideways into view. Druid was basically a snake, with 100 or so little snakes glued on where humans had legs and arms. Well, usually. He had about half that many now. Some of his tentacles were severed and bandaged. Some of those were my fault. Dozens were prosthetic housings for tools and weapons, but none of those blinked or whirred or glowed anymore. They just hung limp at his sides. One of the tentacles he'd been born with, in the bunch where a man's right arm would be, was 4 inches shorter than it should be. Dripping from the recent jagged and inflamed amputation site was this thick, transparent goo his body used to scab up damaged tissue. "Oh, man," I said, my heart breaking a little at what the Skyroad's ex-security chief had inflicted on my friend. When I said that, Drew snarled, revealing his mouthful of glassy fangs. The snarl turned back into a rattle. Then I saw he was holding something shiny behind his head. Something he raised over his head in the grip of 6 tentacles, a pitted and scarred wrench as long as my arm and twice as thick. The rattle sped up and got louder, sinking deep in his chest, and he slithered towards me. People do stupid things when they're scared. Well, at least when they're new at being scared. There's a whole hell of a lot of shitty things about getting used to being in danger. I'd spent years expecting death to find me sooner than taxes. It changes you. People who'd known me for years still moved and talked different around me. Sure, anyone who tagged me for being a vet thanked me for my service. But after that, most of them crossed the street or left the building right after. A few had left the state. Like I said, there's not that many of us. With all that experience, some called it trauma. Some called it PTSD, and some still called me up in the middle of the night offering to buy the movie rights. I knew better than to show any sign of weakness to a bull Samadon with his blood up. No, I wasn't new at scared, stupid. I was worse. I felt it happening before I decided to do it. A snarl of my own was tugging at my face, and I reared back and threw as hard as I could. Whitaker's gun hit Drew square between the eyes. The gun bounced and skittered away, and we stared at each other in the sudden silence of his cut-off rattle. Combat instincts, my ass. "You stupid, selfish fucking idiot," I roared in the quiet. Drew blinked. "Sarge?" "Shut up," I roared at him, stomping towards him and then past him. I had one foot in the present at least. And I took a moment to see past my hurt and my pain to survey the damage he had done. The last door between us and the Skyroad's reactor core was bent inwards. Yellow lights flashed all around it. There were holes in the surface, and wires sparked inside. It looked like it would fall off its hinges if I even sneezed too loud. I remembered thinking that afterwards, at least. In the moment, I just spun around and stalked back to Druid's side and punched him right in his scary fanged mouth. Drew reeled, his eyes getting wider. "The fuck is wrong with you, man?" I saw the hurt on his face at those words. and we both heard the hurt in my voice. I held out my hand in between us. He flinched but didn't back away as I closed in, hand raised. Tears welled up and scalded my eyeballs. "Teddy," I hissed, and folded one finger in. "Chris," I choked, and folded another finger. "Tom," just a whisper now, and one more finger down. I dropped one last finger as I dropped my hand, thinking of Priya. "That's all I got left if you off yourself, you fucking baby." I meant to shout the words so loud they peeled the skin off his face, but they came out as sobs. Drewer dropped the wrench and squealed. The sound was like knives in my ears, and I was only wired to hear a third of the frequencies broadcasting his pain. I didn't care. I hugged him close, and he lashed me back with trembling tentacles. "Don't you ever do this to me again," I told him. The wailing died down for a moment, and Drew finally managed to grunt and nod a promise. And then the wailing came on strong again. That was it. We cried and hugged, okay? And we both needed it. I think I choked out more poison that was in me with all the crying and hugging than when I stabbed myself on Tom's poison spikes and hugged a toilet for a night. "We've got your back. Teddy and Chris are just outside. No one's putting you back in a cell, okay?" A little while later, Drew's keening finally cut out. At least I think it did. My ears kept ringing for a while longer. "They turned them all off, Jake." Drew sniffed miserably into the top of my head. "You know what a good tentacle costs?" I held on tight to a couple of his flesh and blood tentacles as I pulled my face back. I squeezed hard, keeping up the connection, but I had to see his face to tell him the rest. You can't buy any more, bud. They took your hunting license, you get that, right? I started replaying the night in my head. Did he get that? One sharp, spiking sob stabbed into my brain, and then he gave a human-style nod. "What do I do now, Sarge?" I shook my head and shrugged. A piss-weak answer, but I didn't have anything better. Then I laughed. "You're asking me?" Mercifully, Samadon laughter was silent. More mercifully, he let me out of his snaky bear hug before his laughing tentacles constricted too tight and cracked more of my insides. I rubbed the wet off my face with my shirt sleeve. "The first thing we do is get the hell out of..." The room flared red and an alarm started screaming. "Jake!" Priya skidded through the door. Drew looked at her, then at me. "Is she your girlfriend? Reactor containment failure imminent. Emergency measures required. Reactor containment failure imminent. Like I said, I wasn't new at being scared. That didn't mean I didn't get scared. Gov spent $1 billion training me to save the world while being well and truly scared, and I was good at it. All the tech they wired me with, and all the training I got, and still so much of my skills boiled down to the same thing every soldier in every age, every boot camp had to learn. I listened to those instincts, and I screamed and pushed Drew towards the door, knowing that sometimes there's only one thing you can do to survive. Run! Last Man Home. On the Sky Road. Written and recorded by John Miro. Stay tuned